Hi, I'm Matt Morrissey from Stamp Roll Aerobatic Company. We're here at the East Kansas City Airport to talk about a very important subject, stall spin awareness. I've invited my father, Colonel John Morrissey, to give the presentation. Let's go inside and see what he has to say.
Thanks for the kind words and thanks for coming. We're here today to talk about an age-old problem, spins, and loss of control in flight leading to auto-rotation. Problems have been with us as long as we've been flying airplanes, and it applies to the Sukhoi, it applies to the aerobatic aircraft, and it applies to every airplane out there that flies. So let me talk about definitions a little bit to kind of put us on common footing. Spinning is a euphemism or slang for auto-rotation, and an auto-rotation is a rolling, yawing moment which is self-perpetuating. And this is kind of a foot stomper. Anytime any airplane, from a Boeing 747 to a Cub to a Sukhoi, experiences yaw and stall simultaneously, there will be auto-rotation. And when this auto-rotation happens in an unplanned mode, for example, you're not practicing spins, you're busy doing something else, and you get the simultaneous occurrence of stall and yaw, there will be auto-rotation. And here's the problem. In all of your flight training, at least in the United States, your practical test standards don't require you to be proficient in stall, spin events or inadvertent departures from controlled flight. And more specifically, what do you do if that happens? Let me show you the problem. When you've learned to fly, all of your training occurs in this part of the lift diagram. And very simply, and just to put us all on a common sheet of music, this line here is angle of attack. As we go to the right, my right, angle of attack gets larger. And as angle of attack gets larger, the coefficient of lift increases up to a point. When we get to the coefficient of lift maximum, called CL max, any further increase in angle of attack causes a decrease in lift. Lift doesn't go to zero, it starts down. And what this chart doesn't show is there's a tremendous increase in drag associated with the airflow separation from the wing past this point. This CL max, you and I and our fellow aviators call it stall. We just call it a stall when we get past this point. Now, when you learn to fly, almost all of your training was in this left-hand section of the lift diagram. And when you learned stalls as a private pilot, your angle of attack only got over to about this line. There was a small increase in angle of attack past CL max, or the stall angle of attack. So there was some stalling going on, but not deep stalls. And now commercial pilots are only required to demonstrate the approach to the stall. And instructor pilots live in this narrow range just on the right-hand side of the CL max line. As you proceed down this line to the right, angle of attack, the symbol for angle of attack alpha, increases. And when angle of attack increases, the coefficient of lift increases. That's not the total lift in pounds produced by the wing, but it's a potential lift based on wing area, speed, and everything that occurs. So as we increase angle of attack, the coefficient of lift of the wing increases to this point, and then it starts down. And when it starts down, it doesn't go to zero, as some say. It starts decreasing. At the point the coefficient of lift peaks and starts down, that's where the guys in the bar call it the stall angle of attack. So that's the euphemism, the slang term for it, but really it's CL max. Now, to further define the problem, when you learn to fly, all of your training was in this section of the lift diagram. And when you go for a flight test, your practical test standards require you to demonstrate proficiency only in this section and a little bit to the right for stalls. People don't die over here. Yeah, they make dumb decisions. They don't have enough fuel, they fly into bad weather, but they don't hit the ground in an auto rotation mode here. Now, we get into the other side of the lift diagram. And ladies and gentlemen, this is where people die. This is the forbidden territory of the deep stall, and this is where auto rotation occurs. This is the part they don't tell you about when you learn to fly. And this is the part we're here to talk about today. What happens if you end up over here? And what forces are acting on the airplane over there, and why would anybody get there to begin with? You see, what we've got in our pilot training system today is a Nancy Reagan just say no to stalls program. And our flight training today, I kind of hearken back to comparing it to pre-Columbus sailing. You could sail anywhere in the world you wanted to in pre-Columbus sailing, as long as you could see land and the water wasn't over your shoulders. You weren't going to drown and you weren't going to get lost. And that's what we've ended up with today. And there's a lot of reasons for that, which I won't go into now. Now let's talk about life over here a little bit. The life that you haven't been trained for. The arena that you haven't been exposed to. What happens when CLmax peaks out and you start down on lift, and if the chart doesn't show it, but an incredible increase in drag in the wing when it peaks out on angle of attack here. A typical stall spin scenario to me, and I've been sitting in the back of these airplanes aerobatically watching people do this since 1978, and I've been teaching in tandem seat airplanes since 1959, and I can almost guarantee you that when the following event occurs, we will get into this regime. So what's happening? Typical stall spin scenario. Pilot becomes distracted and allows angle of attack to increase. Angle of attack increases to the point where it peaks and gets on the downside of CLmax. Pilot's feet are on the floor, and ladies and gentlemen, I don't care how you believe you fly, 95% or more of the typical American pilot fly with their feet on the floor, not on the rudder pedals. So what does that mean? As angle of attack increases, yaw develops. Why? Because it's got an engine in the front with a propeller, and in an American engine, it starts moving the nose to the left. That's called left yaw. So now we're getting back to where I talked about earlier. We're about to have a simultaneous occurrence of yaw, because the pilot's feet aren't on the floor, and stall. We're headed over the top here on angle of attack. The reasons that it gets past the critical angle of attack are numerous and insignificant. It happens. When angle of attack passes peak with yaw, the nose will drop. Why? Because lift drops. That's why they call it a stall. The nose drops, and when the nose drops, almost all cases a wing will drop, and in almost all cases it'll be the left wing, because this airplane will always spin in the direction of yaw. It will always brake in the direction of yaw. No right rudder, plane yawing left, the nose will drop, the aircraft will enter a left auto rotation. Now bear with me on this. Over here, when you were learning to fly and the nose was down, what control did you use 100% of the time to bring the nose back up? You used yoke or stick. You used the pitch control. Nose goes down, you want it up, pitch control comes back. That is an ingrained habit pattern. And when the wing goes down and you want to bring it up, how did you bring it up? You brought it up with right, let's say the left wing went down. You bring it up with right yoke or right stick. You used aileron. Big problem, because if you try to use aileron in this side of the lift diagram to control bank, you will achieve a roll opposite than that which is intended and create an immense amount of drag in the direction of the downwing. So you can just see it. Plane enters a stall inadvertently, nose drops, stick comes back, puts the angle of attack further to the right. Wing drops, stick goes in opposite the downwing. What happens when that stick goes in opposite the downwing? It lowers the aileron on the down wing. That down aileron creates an incredible amount of drag. Drag on the interior side of the rotation. Now the aircraft starts to auto-rotate. And there's one other little factor they don't talk about in big or small print when they teach you stalls. When a wing drops, in this case, when the left wing drops, the angle of attack on the descending wing increases dramatically, and the angle of attack on the ascending wing decreases. This wing is already stalled, and when the wing drops, the angle of attack goes further to right. And then the pilot tries to raise the nose with backstick, and the angle of attack goes further to the right. The increase in induced drag due to lift, on that wing is incredibly high. Therefore, the left side of the aircraft in this example has much more drag than the right, causing further yaw to the left. However, the ascending wing decreases angle of attack. Therefore, you have the ascending wing living over here in good guy country, and the descending wing over here in bad guy country. A tremendous imbalance in lift. Got more lift on the outside than you do on the inside, more drag on the inside than you do on the outside. The differential lift causes the roll, the differential drag causes the yaw, and we have a yawing and rolling motion, which is the quintessential definition of auto-rotation. And the pilot sitting in the cockpit knows nothing else than to try to stop the aileron, stop the roll with aileron, and to bring the nose up with stick. Each of those motions in and of themselves will seal the airplane into the auto-rotation until it hits the earth. Is problem, because not trained. Yes, we memorize. When it's spinning, do this. When you're supposed to go forward on the stick and use opposite rudder. Really, you're supposed to use opposite rudder and go forward on the stick. That's not going to happen when somebody's panicked and has no training background to go to. Now, there is a demonstration that I use in the pits which shows how powerful the ailerons are in recovering from an auto-rotation. I demonstrate the typical stall spin scenario. We put our feet in the floor, with power on the airplane, raise the nose, and when it stalls, the left wing drops, the nose drops. We make the typical mistake. We come back on the stick and we move the aileron to the right. And in short order, the aircraft is spinning to the left, rather flat. The nose is within 45 degrees of the horizon, which is the definition of a flat spin. And after that spin stabilizes, we take the stick and move it full into the direction of the auto-rotation, in this case full left, which lowers the right aileron and raises the left aileron. This causes so much drag on the right side of the aircraft that even with the stick all the way back, the spin will stop, the nose will come level, and with full left stick, full left aileron, the aircraft will enter an auto-rotation or spin to the right. That's how effective and powerful ailerons are, and that's how misuse of the ailerons, how powerful the misuse of ailerons can be in aiding and abetting the auto-rotation. Okay. A couple of other factors involved here in auto-rotation. When the aircraft auto-rotates inadvertently, we call that a departure, an inadvertent departure from controlled flight. Controlled flight is over here on the good guy side of the envelope. When the aircraft inadvertently enters this arena with yaw, it will auto-rotate. And when that happens, you have to assume that the pilot is disoriented. And you say, well, maybe those other guys, but not me. Well, I'm here to tell you it's happened to me, and I never thought it would happen to me, and when it happened, I was disoriented. The only thing I knew was that I had departed controlled flight. When an aircraft spins, and more in particularly when it departs controlled flight, there is one, well, there are several, but there is a very important thing that happens to us physiologically. Our focal length comes in to something near, close, safe, and familiar. Gas cap, cowl, airspeed altimeter, the cockpit. And we don't want to see that product there that's spinning The ground coming up, that's bad news. Somehow psychologically it comes in, and I can tell you from sitting in the back of these things for about 40 years, it happens. And that's part of the training process for spin recovery. Part of your procedure is you must train yourself that no matter what's happening to that airplane, you must keep yourself focused to infinity. And infinity in this case means the ground or the horizon. You have to reach out there and stabilize. As the young man or woman who was flying U-controlled airplanes years ago, if you just watched that airplane, about 3 revolutions you were going to tip over. You've got to reach out and you've got to find the horizon, and you've got to remain focused on that horizon. So you have to assume when you enter an inadvertent auto-rotation that you're disoriented. Believe it. So you have to have a procedure. You can't say, gee, I wonder, maybe I would get the handbook out or read that placard up there that says what to do. It's not going to happen. You have to have some qualification training in spin recovery and some continuation training. You have to have a procedure. I mean, when you're on a 4-engine airliner, a 747-400, and it weighs 900,000 pounds, and they're going down the runway and rotate, and number 3 quits or shells out, the captain doesn't say, George, see if you can find that handbook. I knew there's something we were supposed to do when the engine quit. No, it's not how it happens. They have a procedure to go to. And you have not been taught a procedure to go to when you learn to fly. And that's what we're here to talk about. The procedure originated with Eric Mueller, was perfected by Gene Beggs, and it's called an emergency spin recovery procedure. That's a euphemism. What it means is, how do you get control back in this airplane after it departs control flight? A procedure that will cover upright spins, inverted spins, flat spins, and normal spins. It's very simple. Idle. You must remove power. Why do you have to remove power? You remove power because there's a big gyroscope on the front of these aircraft. There's a rotating engine, and more importantly, there is a propeller rotating, and that propeller becomes a disc. And the mass of the disc and the RPM determine the effectiveness of the gyroscope. General aviation aircraft like a Cessna 150, it's not terribly dominant. It's effective, but it's not dominant. You start getting airplanes like a Pitts S2A, my Pitts. Airplane empty weight, 1,040 pounds. 200 horse engine, big aluminum prop. Yes, great influence. On the Sukhoi, even more influence. 400 horse or 360 variant of Sukhoi, and a big 3-bladed propeller. You have a big gyroscope up there. And I tell you, when that airplane's down to 20 or 30 or 10 miles an hour, and that power's full on, that gyroscope's like a big gorilla. It sits anywhere it wants to, and it takes you anywhere it wants to go. You have got to get rid of the big gorilla to use the recovery from an inadvertent departure. So throttle comes to idle, and then comes to real idle. Well, what if it quits? Start it later. You got bigger fish to fry now than an engine quitting. Step number 2, you must release all controls. You must put your feet on the floor and fold your arms and get your hands off the controls. Well, why would you do that? Because if you are disoriented, you will not know which controls to utilize. It's like the swimmer who becomes fatigued and starts flailing. I see it. The controls are madly going around the cockpit, people trying to fly the airplane out, the only way they know how to try to control roll with aileron and get the nose up a stick. Let it go, because you're not going to help the situation. Think about it. If you don't know what's happening, what's the chances of putting the controls in the correct position? 0. Step 3, determine. Determine what? Am I spinning left? Am I spinning right? Or am I not spinning? If you're not spinning, the single clue, absolutely correct at all times, you won't be auto-rotating, but you've never been trained for this, so you won't know what auto-rotation really feels like. You will in your qualification training. But if that airspeed is building steadily and directly, you are not spinning. And there are certain values. I mean, if the airspeed's 120 and you're in a general aviation light aircraft, you are not spinning. Not spinning. Now, remember where we talked about you have to focus to infinity? Part of this step number 3 is determine, am I spinning left, am I spinning right, or not spinning? Let's assume you're spinning because you've had an inadvertent departure. You look straight out the front. you look straight out the front, down the gun sight, and focus on the ground. And you ask yourself, are my shoulders moving to the left or are my shoulders moving to the right? If your shoulders are moving to the left, you're spinning left. And if they're moving to the right, you're spinning right. You don't care if you're upright or inverted, normal or flat. Okay, now I've gotten the power off, I've released everything, and now I've determined I'm in a left-hand auto rotation. What do I do? Full, aggressive, and deliberate right rudder. Full. And continue to look out the front. And what will happen is that airplane will stop like a dart in a board. And it will be basically vertical down. It might be 70 degrees pitch, it might be tucked under 10 degrees. Essentially, it's going straight down. You say, well, what happens if I'm not deft and I don't get off the rudder quickly enough? It'll spin the other way. No, it won't. It won't spin the other way because we've eliminated one of the prerequisites of the spin. Our angle of attack is down to here, almost. Because when the aircraft is straight down, angle of attack is 0. And if you don't have your hand on the angle of attack lever, which is the yoke or the stick, the angle of attack is going to settle down to about 0. So you'll be going straight down in a big yaw. Now all you do is take the nose and pull it up with the stick once you get good flying speed, which is around 120 or 30 miles an hour, and come to level flight. Well, that sounds easy. Not so easy if you haven't been trained in some form of aerobatic. Now let's talk about pitch. When you learned to fly over here in good guy country, how much pitch did you really experience? There's none really required by the practical test standards to be demonstrated. Over 30 degrees of pitch, they call it aerobatics. Maybe 20 degrees up and 20 degrees down, I doubt it. But maybe we could stretch it and say that a person learning to fly experienced control of the aircraft at 20 degrees up and 20 degrees nose down. Let's make it 30 degrees up and 30 degrees down. That's 30 and 30 is 60. There are 360 degrees of pitch. That means 300 degrees totally unexplored, a foreign land, never been there before. And now we're going to ask people to deal with this during a departure from controlled flight? I don't think so. Because remember, after we've reduced the power to idle, after we've let go of the controls, after we've determined the direction, this is kind of task intensive enough, the aircraft stops the auto rotation and is essentially vertical down. Now we're asking somebody to go from vertical down to level flight who has never done it before. There has been no training in all attitude flight. I'm not saying this is right, wrong, good, or bad, but some things aren't right or wrong, good, or bad. They just are, and this is one of those things that are. Most of our flying public has not been in this attitude. So the point I'm trying to make is that in addition to an emergency procedure to go to when you have an inadvertent departure from controlled flight, there ought to be some training, rudimentary, some exposure into how to control an aircraft through 360 degrees of pitch and 360 degrees of roll. It just makes sense to me. Now, are there other factors involved with recovering from inadvertent departures? Well, of course. I mean, there's the human factor, there's fright. How close am I to the ground? Ladies and gentlemen, if this happens at 500 feet, you're going to die. I mean, that's just the way it is. But through improved training, qualification training, learning how to spin the airplane, learning how, with an instructor on board, to recover from inadvertent departures, your confidence grows. Remember that sailor that didn't want to lose sight of land, didn't want to get in water over his head? We'd like to make you be able to navigate outside of land, in deep water. Get the boogeyman off your shoulder, because people know they haven't been told everything there is to know about this training, about flight training. So an hour or two of all attitude flight, and I see this all the time in my flight school, 95% of the people that walk through the front door of my school don't want to be world champion. They don't want to be an airshow pilot. They want to know what happens if. When we show them what happens if, then they're more relaxed, they're more comfortable, they're more confident. So the likelihood of spinning in the traffic pattern goes way down. Another factor, people say, well, will this procedure work all the time? Probably not. What? Yep, it probably won't work all the time. Why? Several factors. Just like that 7447 we talked about, loses an engine at critical point on takeoff, it rotate, just after rotate, and they decide to go. Will it always fly on 3 engines? Most of the time. Well, why wouldn't it? Because the reaction is slightly incorrect. They don't do that every day. And so what I'm talking about here is risk management. I think we can see that if we've had training in the event, both sides of the lift curve, if we have a procedure to go to, if the procedure has been rehearsed in qualification training and tuned up every year or two for continuation training, that we are much more likely to survive an inadvertent departure than if it were to happen straight away, no training, and totally unexpected and unexperienced. And that's all we're talking about is risk management. There are no guarantees in the business, but the better trained you are, the luckier you are. Do all planes react the same when they have a departure, react the same to the recovery technique? And I would say by and large, on balance, yes. I haven't flown all of them. I have flown all of the Sukhoi models except the 3-1, and I've flown the extra 300 and 300L and the CAP 231, 231EX and 232, and all of the Pitts variants, the factory variants. What I would say is that the philosophy that we've just gone through about what causes auto-rotation are true. The effectiveness of the ailerons and the elevators and the dominance of the gyroscope change by model. As an example, we have now with CAP and Sukhoi full span ailerons that are very, very powerful, as opposed to the small 3-bay ailerons on the Pitts. Now this is not a comparison in any other aspect than the auto-rotation mode. But the good news is about full span effective ailerons is when they're used correctly, they're very powerful as a recovery tool. But when there's a mistake made in the utilization of aileron in auto-rotation, big problem, because now you have these powerful forces keeping you in the auto-rotation. Elevator, I don't find too much difference in the effectiveness of the elevators between the variants. Yes, there are some, but they're not of an order of magnitude of the aileron power differential as aircraft mature aerobatically. Power. The larger the mass of the engine and propeller disc compared to the total weight of the aircraft, the more dominant the power plant will be in spin modes, and that will further emphasize, require the need to remove power from the aircraft for recovery. So a Luscombe, for instance, the power plant engine, yes, it'll cause it to go flat, but not that dominant, whereas a Sukhoi or a CAP 232, yes, very dominant. Now the differences between home-built aircraft and factory-built aircraft. The basic philosophy of how aircraft enter inadvertent departures, the effect of angle of attack, of course, all remains the same, the effect of aileron, the effect of power. But the repeatability between variants within the same type is not as good as factory production aircraft. And for obvious reasons. Each home-built aircraft is a different entity unto itself and therefore becomes slightly less predictable in its response to control inputs in the emergency method. Of course, now we have a very valid question. This is all wonderful for these very beautiful, expensive airplanes, but how does it work with general aviation aircraft? In my opinion, having tried it, I have never found a failure mode in both what happens in the inadvertent departure and the ability to recover. I have heard people say they've had trouble recovering from spins inadvertently entered in aircraft which have a balance tab forward of the hinge line on the elevator. But I've gone out and tried it on the 152, the Aerobat, and I have found absolutely no problem. The problem is when you start giving too many specific instructions on how to recover from an emergency, realizing this isn't practiced very much, you decrease the effectivity of the procedure. Too many ironclad steps ends up in the too hard to do pile. So I'll stand by what I said, as I believe it's proper to have the procedure, and that the procedure will tend to work in most cases. And here we have a situation where if you are centralizing the controls with your hands, there's only one way to do it. You have to look at the ailerons. People used to say, centralize the controls, that's easy. I'd say, fine, sit here on the ground in my pits. We have the canopy open, there's no hurry, there's no emergency, you can have water, relax. You look straight ahead, you get the ailerons centralized. And when they're centralized, let me know. If they're centralized, the lesson is free. If they're not, it's double. They never got a free lesson because you have to look at ailerons. The point here, it's critical. If you're looking at the ailerons, you're not looking out the front, and the only way to determine spin rotation is to look right down that long barrel squirrel rifle, which is the cowling of the aircraft at the ground. If you look laterally left and right, you're on the other side of the teeter-totter, and it will appear that you're spinning an incorrect direction. You're in back of the vertical axis. So one other factor here on centralizing controls. Airframe neutral, in which the aileron is in its correct slot, not up or down in the airframe, is not aerodynamic neutral because there is different lift and drag on both sides of the wing. Example, if you're in an upright spin to the left and let go of the stick, fold your hands and look, you will find in almost all cases the left interior aileron will be up a little bit and the right exterior aileron will be down a little bit. Remember when I said if you use aileron into the spin, it will help with recovery? The airplane knows that because it will go to aerodynamic neutral, which is not airframe neutral. If you try to center the ailerons, you're going to airframe neutral. It's okay, but to me it's a question that doesn't need to be asked. If you just let go, the airplane will do fine in ailerons. Well, this is all a great speech, John. Wonderful. But have you ever had to use it for keeps? Yes, I have. And just briefly, I'd like to share it with you because I think it is important to know that you have a procedure to go to. I was in Russia. It was 91, and it was a cultural exchange. I was at the Russian training camp at Borky, and the A-team was there, not me, theirs. And our A-team was too. We had Patty and Pete Anderson, Ellen Dean were there, and I was going to be the coach of U.S. team, so it felt appropriate. Kasum, my counterpart, felt it appropriate that I fly as much as they did, and I loved him for it. So I had a Sukhoi out doing vertical ascending 3/4 inside snap, or flick. Small problem, overcast, 3,300 feet, gray cloud, gray ground, hazy, no defined horizon, so I flicked it upward and did it incorrectly, stayed on the controls too long, and it became obvious that I had departed controlled flight. And denial is a wonderful thing, you know, but I said, no, this is, and it was spinning. I said, okay, we're spinning flat inverted. I knew that. So I said, well, Big Mouth, this is the chance you get to see whether this stuff really works. So I did it there was no hurry. It was either going to work or it wasn't. And either way, there was nothing to worry about. Idle, beautiful. Release, obviously, I was able to determine easily the nose direction because I've trained myself to focus to infinity. Opposite rudder, stop like a dart in a board, pull out, no problem. It was interesting. And I was glad I had a procedure to go to. There just aren't very many locations, especially in the United States, that are equipped to handle this sort of in-depth spin training. The International Aerobatic Club has a list of instructors and flight schools, and I would say any one of them would be a good place to start, but I would ask the question, how many times have you done this in that airplane? and this meaning the recovery from inadvertent departure. Okay, well, this has all been wonderful. We've been talking about things, putting things on blackboards and talking about theory, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. Now it's time to go flying. And I'd like to show you what this looks like from the inside and lead you through some of the in-flight examples of what I've been talking about on the board. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm talking to you from the beautiful first class section of Sukhoi 29. We're here to talk about a serious subject. The subject of the procedures to be used to recover your aircraft unintentionally departs controlled flight. Now, these procedures may not work perfectly in all situations. However, a demonstrably effective, mature, practiced approach to the recovery from unintentional departures is simply an essential tool for the competent pilot. Don't just watch this film and go out and try it. You need to get qualified instruction from a qualified instructor with total spin experience. That means upright, inverted, flat, and normal in the type of aircraft that you are flying. Contact your IAC headquarters for phone numbers and names of qualified instructors. It is possible, have you not had training, to be somewhat upset, disoriented, and disturbed by the violence of some of the departures. That's why it can cause extreme disorientation. And that's why you need an emergency procedure to go to so you don't have to figure it out. Okay, the purpose of this demonstration is to show how in an accidental departure, use of the controls in a way that we've repeatedly learned in our flight training, that is normal controls, aileron for bank, backstick to bring the nose up as if we were on the left side of the lift curve, can produce a spin and lock you into the spin. We're raising the nose as if a pilot were distracted, fairly typical general aviation departure. Nothing really wild about this attitude. When the aircraft departs, the nose will drop and a wing will probably drop. And we'll try to bring the nose up with stick. Wings down, so I'll use right stick. See it spinning? And now the more snap violently to the left, trying to recover it with aileron. Now just let it go, nose comes down and come back. The purpose of this spin will be to demonstrate the emergency procedure used to recover from an inadvertent departure from controlled flight. In this case, I'm going to select the vertical attitude as might be experienced with a hammerhead going wrong. The nose is coming up to the vertical, but I'm going to pull it past the vertical, a common mistake. And when it's time to pivot, I'm going to ignore that, another common mistake, and try to fight it out, fly it out. Okay, we're now backing up, and we're spinning. And I'm going to just idle, let it go. Right rudder, easily out of it, rather violent one. But when I let it, I came to idle, let go, and used right rudder, recovery was immediate. The purpose of this spin is to show a typical inadvertent departure from controlled flight. We're going to select vertical flight as if the pilot were attempting a hammerhead. Incorrectly, I might add. Typically, pilot gets too far on back. Airplane begins to slide, and pilot thinks it's still going forward, then tries to add forward stick. And it typically enters an inverted flat spin to the right. Here, we would first remove all power. Then release all controls, nose is moving to the right, left rudder stops rotation, then simply raise the nose to the horizon and regain control of normal flight. The purpose of this spin will be to show you a normal stabilized spin to the right in the Sukhoi 29. After the spin is stabilized, I will try mistakenly to recover from the spin with left aileron, which is what most untrained pilots would do. The nose is down, they see the nose is down, they would like to bring it up, so the stick generally remains back. We'll notice an increase in rotation, and the nose will go flat. And I'll try to power it out, which is another idea, not well-founded, that some people try to do, and I'll let you see for yourself what happens. Then we will recover using the emergency method. Power off, releasing all controls, and rudder opposite rotation until stoppage. Then, of course, we'll bring the nose up, put it on the horizon. Entry altitude of 10,000 feet. And as we approach the buffet, which we're getting, I'll lead with a little right rudder, and I'll have full back stick and no aileron. There's a stabilized spin, and I'll try to fight it with left aileron. This isn't good. We're going around faster. Nose is coming up. Now I'll try some power. Oh, nose is coming higher. Now, to recover, I'll come to idle, release all controls. Nose moving to the right, left rudder, stops. And nose coming up. The purpose of this spin will be to show one, a stabilized spin with full back stick and full left rudder, and then stick will be released or moved forward before opposite rudder. The teaching point here is to show the apparent increase in spin rotation, which is more than apparent, it really is, but that the nose is dropping and that the airspeed is rising. It tends to be destabilizing and disorienting if stick is moved forward prior to reversing the rudder in a normal spin recovery. Get the brake, left rudder, full back stick, stabilized spin. Notice, stabilized spin, airspeed around 30, now moving between 0 and 30. I'll let the stick go forward. Notice the speed increase rapidly. Disorienting. But opposite rudder, forward stick, and stop. Very disorienting spin, and as you see, it took 2 turns to recover. The purpose of this spin is to show what happens during the recovery when normal recovery controls, opposite rudder and forward stick, are held too long. Upright spin to the left, nose down always steepest after 180, highest at 360 for stabilized. To the left, right rudder, forward stick and held too long. Notice the spin goes to the right, but the direction of the spin as seen from above does not change, but the nose switched from moving to the pilot's left to moving to the pilot's right. Thank you. And don't forget, the emergency recovery technique works in the pits as well as the Sukhoi.
That went pretty fast. We better take a look at this in slow motion. Notice we've entered a upright spin to the pilot's left, full left rudder, full back stick. It's stabilized. Recovery is right rudder and forward stick. Okay so far. Spin slows and stops. But right rudder and forward stick are held too long. Aircraft then enters an inverted spin to the pilot's right foot. Notice the change in direction, very little change in pitch. You cannot learn this from a tape. This has to be seen to be experienced. This is a very important transition piece here to learn and be aware of. We have lost several aerobatic pilots over the years who did not recognize that a spin reversal had occurred. Thus, they maintained the recovery controls, in this case for the upright spin to the left, not realizing it had transitioned into an inverted spin to the pilot's right, there being very little difference in the sight picture.
We thought we'd conclude our spin demonstrations with a general aviation aircraft, the Cessna 150. This happens to be a Cessna Aerobat. I thought we'd just show the typical stall spin scenario in the Aerobat where a pilot has feet on the floor and an inadvertent spin ensues
and normal reactions to the untrained pilot take place. That is, stick comes back to bring the nose up, and aileron is used to raise the down wing. Okay, we've got our feet on the floor, and the nose is up, but not very high. Aircraft is yawing left. Just assume pilot's attention is diverted. Oh, nose goes down, stick goes to the right. Oh, big problem, spinning left. Now just let go, and notice the spin recovered immediately. But as long as I held that stick back to try to get the nose up, as long as I held aileron opposite the spin would never recover. And that's the teaching point of this little demonstration. What we're going to do now is to show a fully developed spin to the left, which has been exacerbated by using incorrect right outspin yoke or aileron to try to stop the spin, which is what the untrained pilot will do. The spin will tend to go flat, and at this point I'll apply the emergency spin recovery techniques and talk about it while we're doing it. Nose is coming up. I'm going to leave some power on to make sure it stays flat. Nose is coming up further, and at the brake we use full left rudder and full backstick power. Now I'll use right aileron. It's flat. Now power idle, release controls, nose comes down. Oop, before I can even use right rudder, the spin has stopped after the second step of the emergency spin recovery technique. Well, thank you for your attention during 50 minutes of a tape on a very important subject to you and all aviators. Remember, don't go out and try to do this by yourself on the basis of this tape. This is simply an educational tape, not a training tape. The training takes place in the cockpit with a qualified instructor. Best of luck to you.